never learned my neighbor's real name. Everyone on our street called him Mr. Bell, but I don't know if that was his name or just something that stuck after the mailman started using it. He lived in the narrow house at the end of the cul-de-sac, the one that never had Christmas lights, even when the rest of the street glowed through December like a postcard. His windows were always dark. His driveway was always empty. And in winter, especially in winter, his house felt like it was watching us. I moved into Maple Ridge in January of 2014. It was one of those quiet Midwestern developments that looked identical from every angle. Beige siding, black shutters, identical mailboxes, identical snow-covered lawns. People waved but didn't stop. They smiled but didn't ask questions. That kind of neighborhood. The first thing I noticed about Mr. Bell's house was the snow. Every driveway on the street was shoveled within hours of a storm. Every sidewalk was cleared. Every porch had footprints. But his driveway stayed untouched. His steps stayed buried. Snow drifted up against his door and never moved, not even after weeks. Yet the house was not abandoned. I know that because sometimes late at night I could see light moving behind the curtains. Not turning on. Moving. The first time I saw it, I assumed it was a TV. The second time it felt wrong. The light didn't flicker the way a screen does. It slid, slow and deliberate, from one end of the house to the other like someone walking with a lamp. But no one ever went in or out. January that year was brutal. Temperatures stayed below freezing for weeks. Snowstorms stacked on top of each other until the streets narrowed and the air itself felt heavy. Sound carried strangely in winter. You hear things you shouldn't. Footsteps where no one is walking. Doors when no one opens them. I started hearing something around that time. Scraping. It came from outside, usually late at night, always from the direction of Mr. Bell's house. A slow, rhythmic sound, like metal dragged across concrete. At first I thought it was snowplows, but the street was already cleared. Then I thought it might be someone shoveling, but it went on too long. Hours sometimes. I never saw him. I tried to talk to my neighbors about it. They all reacted the same way, small frowns, eyes drifting toward the end of the street, voices lowering. He keeps to himself, one woman said. He's been here longer than all of us, another told me. An older man across the street said, best not to worry about that house. No one elaborated. One night, near the end of January, I woke to the sound of something heavy hitting the side of my house. Not once, repeatedly. Thud, pause, thud. I looked out the bedroom window. Snow was falling lightly, muting everything. At first I saw nothing. Then I noticed footprints leading across my lawn. They came from the direction of Mr. Bell's house. They stopped beneath my window. The footprints didn't look right. They were too deep, pressed straight down into the snow, as if whoever made them had stood still for a long time. No shifting. No pacing. Just wait. I waited for movement. Nothing. When I finally worked up the nerve to go outside, the footprints were gone. Completely erased, as if someone had carefully brushed them away. But on the siding beneath my window, there were faint marks, long vertical scratches, like something had dragged its fingers downward. I didn't sleep after that. Over the next few weeks, things escalated slowly, the way real fear always does. Small changes. Easy to explain away if you wanted to. The scraping sounds grew louder. The lights in his house stayed on longer. The snow around his property began to look disturbed in strange patterns, compressed in wide arcs instead of footprints. Then pets started disappearing. It began with a cat 2 houses down. Indoor-outdoor vanished overnight. Then a dog from the corner house. No tracks leading away. No blood. Just gone. Flyers went up. People searched. Police came and left. Mr. Bell's house was never checked. I started paying closer attention. I began documenting things almost unconsciously. Times, sounds, light patterns. I told myself it was curiosity, not fear. One night around 2:30 a.m. I saw him. I was awake, sitting in the dark, watching the end of the street through the blinds. Snow was falling hard, thick enough to distort distance. The street light near his house flickered, and then the front door opened. It didn't swing outward the way doors do. It opened slowly, inch by inch, as if something behind it was resisting. The darkness inside the house looked deeper than the night outside, like a hole. A figure stepped onto the porch. He was taller than I expected. Too tall. Thin in a way that didn't look healthy. He stood perfectly still, facing the street, as snow collected on his shoulders and head. He didn't move for a long time. Then, very slowly, he turned his head. Not toward the street, toward my house. I closed the blinds so fast they rattled. The next morning, there were footprints in the snow between our houses. They stopped at my back door. 2 days later, the police knocked. They asked if I'd seen anything unusual. A man from 3 houses down was missing. Last seen walking his dog late at night. The dog had been found, frozen, half buried near the tree line behind the cul-de-sac. I told them about the lights, the sounds, the footprints. They took notes. They nodded. They didn't write down the address I pointed to. That night, the scraping came closer than ever before. It wasn't coming from the street anymore. It was coming from my backyard. I watched through the kitchen window as something moved along the fence line. Not walking, sliding, dragging something heavy that left deep grooves in the snow. The shape was wrong, hunched, elongated, arms hanging too low. It stopped near the shed. I could see it clearly now. It was him, or what passed for him. His face was pale, almost colorless, stretched tight over sharp angles. His eyes reflected the porch light like an animal's. His mouth was slightly open, and I could hear his breathing even through the glass. Slow, wet, deliberate. He was dragging something behind him. A long, dark shape wrapped in fabric. I backed away, heart pounding so hard it hurt. I locked every door, turned off every light, sat on the floor and waited. The scraping moved around the house. It paused at each window. When it reached the front door, it stopped for a long time. Then came the knock. Not loud, not urgent. 3 slow taps. I didn't answer. The knocking stopped. I thought it was over. Then I heard the sound of something being leaned carefully against the door. Something heavy. Something that thumped softly as it settled. When morning came, the police found a body on my porch. The missing man, wrapped neatly, positioned like a delivery. Mr. Bell's house was empty when they finally forced entry. Empty except for the basement. They never released details. Officially, he'd been living alone. Officially, there were no suspects. Officially, the case remains unsolved. But I know what they found down there. I saw it once, months later, in an evidence photo leaked online before it disappeared. Deep grooves in the concrete floor, hooks in the ceiling, and a narrow door at the back of the basement that led directly into the storm drains beneath our neighborhood. Winter ended. Spring came. The house was boarded up. But sometimes when snow falls heavy and quiet, I still hear scraping. And I know it's not coming from that house anymore. I didn't notice my neighbor at first. That's the part that still bothers me. He lived directly across the street from me, and yet for nearly 2 months I never really saw him. His house blended into the rest of the block. 2 stories, pale siding, narrow front porch, a single-car garage that never opened. The kind of place you forget exists unless you're looking right at it. I moved into that house in early December, just before the worst part of winter hit. It was an old neighborhood outside Milwaukee, built sometime in the 1950s. Families had grown old there. Kids had left. Silence had settled in like dust. By mid-January, snow had buried everything. The cold was the kind that makes your joints ache even indoors. Nights stretched long and quiet, broken only by the hum of distant traffic and the occasional wind rattling loose shutters. People stayed inside. Curtains stayed closed. That's probably why it took me so long to realize something was wrong. It started with the lights. Every night, at exactly the same time, 1:17 a.m., a light came on in the upstairs window of the house across from mine. Not the whole room. Just a narrow strip, like a door opening slightly inside. The light stayed on for 15 minutes. Then it went off. Every night. At first I thought nothing of it. Insomnia does that. You start noticing patterns that don't matter. But after 2 weeks of the same timing, the same duration, the same narrow band of light, it started to feel intentional. I never saw movement. Just the light. I tried to see the neighbor during the day. I worked from home, so I had plenty of chances. But the house never showed signs of life. No car. No footprints in the snow. No trash bins rolled out on collection day. Still, the light came on every night. The first time I saw him was during a storm. It was late January. Snow was coming down hard, thick enough to blur the streetlights into glowing orbs. I was standing at the front window watching the accumulation when I noticed a figure standing in the middle of the road. At first I thought it was a shadow. Then the figure moved. He stood directly in front of his house, facing mine. Tall, thin, dressed in a dark coat that hung too loosely from his shoulders. No hat, no gloves. Snow collected on him, but he didn't react. He just stood there. I watched him for nearly a full minute before he turned and walked back toward his porch. His movements were stiff, deliberate, like he was concentrating on every step. He didn't look up at my house. That should have reassured me. It didn't. After that night, things changed. I started finding snow disturbed in strange ways outside my house. Not footprints, long, shallow impressions, like something had been dragged across the surface and then carefully smoothed over. One morning, I found my mailbox open. Another morning, my front porch light was on, even though I never turned it on at night. I checked my security camera footage. Nothing. The camera showed hours of stillness, snow falling, shadows shifting slightly with the wind. No movement. No person approaching. No explanation. Then came the smell. It drifted into my house late at night, faint at first, almost unnoticeable. A sour, metallic odor that made the back of my throat tighten. It was strongest near the front door, seeping through the cracks like cold air. I assumed it was something dead in the walls. Old houses have problems like that. But the smell didn't fade. It grew stronger. One night, as I stood in my kitchen, I realized the smell wasn't coming from inside the walls. It was coming from outside, from across the street. I looked out the window. The upstairs light was on. That same narrow strip. Only this time it wasn't steady. It pulsed, slowly brightening, then dimming like breathing. I stopped sleeping. I stayed up watching, writing down times, noticing details. The light still came on at 1:17 a.m., but sometimes it stayed longer now. 20 minutes, 30. Once it stayed on until nearly dawn. That morning I found something in my yard. A glove, leather, dark brown, men's, frozen stiff, half buried near the fence. It wasn't mine. I took it to the police station. They asked me if I knew my neighbor's name. I didn't. They told me the house across the street was listed as occupied, utilities active, property taxes paid. No missing person reports associated with the address. They suggested the glove might belong to a passerby. I knew better. That night the light came on earlier, 12:03 a.m., and for the first time I saw movement behind it. A shadow passed slowly across the narrow band of illumination, not walking, leaning, like someone bending close to a doorframe. I felt a pressure in my chest I couldn't explain. The next day, a woman 2 houses down knocked on my door. She asked if I'd heard anything unusual at night. Her son hadn't come home. He was 22, worked nights, walked past our houses every evening around 11 p.m. No one had seen him since a snowstorm 3 days earlier. Search parties formed. Police cars lined the street. Flashlights cut through snowbanks and empty yards. No one searched the house across from mine. I watched from my window as officers passed it again and again, boots crunching in snow, breath fogging the air. The upstairs light stayed off that night, for the first time since I'd moved in. At 2:41 a.m., my doorbell rang. I froze. I checked the camera. Nothing. The doorbell rang again. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched the footage later. At exactly 2:40 a.m., the camera glitched. Static filled the screen for 30 seconds. When the picture returned, the porch was empty. But something had been left behind. A footprint. Just one. Bare. Pressed deep into the snow. Pointed directly at my door. The next night I saw inside his house. It was an accident. The upstairs curtain shifted, just enough to reveal the room beyond. It wasn't a bedroom. It was empty. No furniture. No bed. No decorations. Just a chair in the center of the room, facing the door. The light source wasn't a lamp. It was mounted to the wall above the chair. Bright, clinical, and there were stains on the floor beneath it. Dark ones. I called the police again. This time they listened. They went to his house the next morning. Forced the door. I watched from my window as they entered, weapons drawn. They stayed inside for nearly an hour. When they came out, their faces were tight. Controlled. Wrong. They didn't look at me. They didn't knock on my door. They boarded the house up that afternoon. The official story was simple. Illegal modifications. Unsafe living conditions. No evidence of criminal activity. The missing young man was never mentioned. 2 weeks later, I moved out. I thought it was over. Then, in mid-February, after I'd settled into my new apartment across town, the light came on again. 1:17 a.m. In the window of a building across the street from me, a narrow strip, pulsing. And when I looked closer, I saw something else. A chair, facing a door. I didn't know his name for almost a year. We shared a wall, but we never spoke. Not once. In the kind of duplex I lived in, that wasn't unusual. The building was old, early 1940s, maybe earlier, and the walls were thick but inconsistent. Some sounds traveled clearly. Others disappeared completely. You learned what to ignore. At least you thought you did. I moved into that place in northern Minnesota in late November. Winter arrived early that year, aggressive and unforgiving. By December, the temperature regularly dropped below zero at night. Snow piled up in hard, uneven layers that never fully melted. It felt like the season had settled in for good. The duplex sat at the edge of a quiet residential block, just before the road narrowed into woods. 2 mirrored units, mine on the left, his on the right. Separate front doors, separate basements, one shared wall running the full length of the building. The landlord told me the other unit was occupied by a quiet guy. That's all. The first thing I noticed was the basement. The stairs creaked differently near the shared wall. A lower, heavier sound, like the wood there had absorbed too much moisture over the years. The basement itself was unfinished. Concrete floor, exposed beams, a single pull-chain light bulb that cast harsh shadows. There was a door on the far side of my basement. It was sealed shut. Painted over so many times the hinges were almost invisible. The landlord told me it used to connect the 2 units decades ago, back when the building was a single-family home. It's nothing, he said. Just an old wall. I believed him. At first, I barely noticed my neighbor. No noise. No visitors. No music. No television bleeding through the wall. Just silence. Then January came. The cold changed everything. When the temperature dropped below zero, the building reacted. Pipes knocked. Wood contracted. The walls themselves seemed to tighten. Sounds carried in strange ways. That's when I first heard him. It was late. Around 1 a.m. The heat kicked on then off. The building settled. And from the other side of the basement wall, I heard movement. Not footsteps. Dragging. Something heavy moving slowly across concrete. I stood at the bottom of the stairs holding my breath, listening. The sound stopped after a few seconds. I told myself it was storage boxes. A furnace. Old buildings make noises. But the next night, when the temperature dropped again, it happened again. Same sound. Same slow drag. Always in the basement. Always after midnight. I never heard anything during the day. Weeks passed. The pattern continued. Below zero nights meant basement noise. Warmer nights meant nothing. I started checking the weather before bed without realizing why. By February, I noticed something else. The smell. It crept into my basement first. Faint, metallic, mixed with damp earth. It wasn't rot exactly. It was sharper, cleaner. Like cold iron and old water. I cleaned obsessively. Bleach, vinegar, baking soda. Nothing helped. One night, I stood near the sealed door and realized the smell was strongest there. I pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. But when I pulled away, my skin felt cold. Not from the air, from the surface of the wall itself. Colder than the rest of the basement. I mentioned it to the landlord. He shrugged. Old insulation, he said. Probably nothing. That night, the dragging sound was closer. Not along the far wall. Right behind the sealed door. I didn't sleep. A few days later, I ran into my neighbor outside. It was early morning. Bitter cold. The kind that burns your lungs. He was standing by his car, scraping ice from the windshield. He looked older than I expected. Late 50s maybe. Thin. His face was pale, almost gray, and his eyes didn't quite focus on me when I said hello. He nodded. Didn't speak. I noticed his hands. Red. Raw. Cracked badly, like they were constantly exposed to cold and moisture. That was the only time I saw him that close. After that, the noises changed. They became more deliberate. Not dragging anymore. Pounding. Slow, measured impacts against the shared wall. Not loud. Controlled. Like someone testing the strength of something. It only happened when the temperature dropped below zero. Always in the basement. Always late. One night, I recorded it on my phone. The audio was faint, but it was there. A dull thud. Plus, another thud. I played it back the next day. It sounded like someone knocking from inside concrete. I started sleeping upstairs with the lights on. Then the water shut off. Only mine. The landlord sent a plumber. He checked the pipes, frowned, and said something about pressure issues. He asked if anyone had been doing construction next door. I said no. That night, I heard voices for the first time. Not clear. Muffled. Oh, not arguing. Not talking. Whispering. I stood on the basement stairs, heart pounding, listening as the sound drifted through the wall. There was more than one voice. One of them stopped abruptly. The others followed. Then came the pounding. Harder this time. Closer to the sealed door. I called the police. They came. Walked through my unit. Listened. Heard nothing. They knocked on my neighbor's door. No answer. They left. The next morning, I found something on my basement floor. A hair. Long, dark. Frozen stiff, like it had been pressed against something cold for a long time. It wasn't mine. That was the night the temperature hit -15. The cold was extreme. The building groaned like it was under strain. At 2:12 a.m. I woke to a new sound. Scraping. Right behind the sealed door. Not dragging. Cutting. Metal on concrete. Slow. Methodical. I stood there, shaking, staring at the door as dust drifted down from the frame. Fine gray powder settled on the floor. The sound stopped suddenly. Then I heard breathing. Not through the wall. Through the door. I backed away. The breathing continued for a long time. Then came 3 slow knocks. From the other side. I didn't answer. I didn't move. When morning came, the sealed door had changed. The paint was cracked. Hairline fractures spreading outward from the center. The landlord didn't answer his phone. I packed a bag and left. I never went back for my furniture. A month later, the building was on the news. A utility worker had reported unusual heat readings beneath the structure. Excavation revealed a cavity under the basements. An old sub-basement sealed off decades earlier. They found human remains. More than one. The neighbor was gone. So was the landlord. The official explanation was vague. Illegal modifications. Unknown victims. Ongoing investigation. The building was demolished in spring. But winters are still cold there. And sometimes when the temperature drops far enough, I swear I can still hear it. That slow, deliberate pounding. From beneath the ground.